Okay. So, let's see this. Oh, no. This, no. Okay. So let me read the verse again that we have. Two versions. Okay. Faith and ethical discipline, learning, generosity. Now, this one has learning before generosity. An untainted sense of integrity and consideration for others, and wisdom are the 7 jewels or riches spoken of by the Buddha. Know that the other worldly riches have no value. And the other one was the wealth of faith, the wealth of ethics. Then this one has giving and learning, conscience and remorse. I'm not sure which order they have those two in. There's so many different translations for some of the terms that it's hard. So I thought with the learning one, just because that's what we talked about last time, just to maybe go over briefly some of the learning that they do in the Tibetan monasteries, just so that you have an idea of what happens in Galu monasteries. Because some of that program, we do here, and some we're not doing, because it's a wonderful program, but I think it doesn't necessarily meet the inner needs of Westerners, because there's a lot of study, a lot of debate, and nobody really teaches you to meditate. And I think the Westerners who come into the Dharma really want something that's going to touch their heart and help them with their problems. So that's why I think the program they do in the Tibetan monasteries is wonderful for the Tibetans, but we're not going to duplicate it here. Part of the reason is many years ago I went to Tarpachuling. This was many, many years ago. It was Geshe Repton's monastery in Switzerland. And it was very interesting going there. It was completely filled with Inji monks and a few Tibetans, but everything was just like a Tibetan monastery. The monks did their morning puja in Tibetan, they debated in Tibetan, the classes were in Tibetan, the pujas were in everything, the chanting before meals, everything, yeah. And then very sadly, after Geshe Rabten passed away, then the monks all scattered, and I don't know if any of them are still ordained or not. And one time I was talking with Zopa Rinpoche about this, and he commented, that he thought part of it was that the Westerners really need something that would touch their heart and move their hearts, and that kind of program, beautiful the way it was, didn't quite do that. Yeah. And so, personally, I love that kind of study. I also grew up on Lojong and Lam Rim and treasure that. And I know that that is what really helps me and keeps me balanced and gives me the overall view of what the path is about and the practice is about. But still, because we're in that tradition, it's very helpful to know what they're doing in those monasteries. So when you enter, first of all, you usually enter as a little kid. And so little kids do what they're told, most of them. And so what you start out with is memorization. Yeah. Now, Westerners don't meet the Dharma usually until they're adults. And if you sit them down with a Tibetan text and tell them to memorize it, I don't think they're going to cooperate very much. And most of the texts that the Tibetans are memorizing, like Abhisamaya Ankara, are not translated into English, so you're not going to memorize them in English. And even if you did, a text like that is basically lists of terms. There's and an adult is not, at least in our culture, is not going to do that, because our culture, the traditional culture, Buddhist culture, is an oral culture. That's we've been learning on Friday nights. You learn everything by heart. Our Western culture is an information culture where we learn how to find the information we want. So we're not always required to remember it, but we need to know how to find it. Okay, so it's two different ways of looking at knowledge. Okay, so you enter the monastery when you're a little kid, and you start memorizing these texts. And now they also have a school for some of the kids, at least for the boys. For the girls, I don't know. Maybe they go to one of the TCV schools or Central Tibetan schools. But at least for the boys, it's Sarah and Drepung, I know, and Ikand, and all three of them, they have schools where they're now getting a little bit of secular education together with their Buddhist education. When we first went there, there was no secular education at all. So now they're getting that. And they start out with debating with Dura, the collected topics that we're doing. And then they go on to, there's kind of three parts to the Dura, three sections. So the one is, learning about colors and all these different terms and so on. The second one is low rig, mind and awareness. So learning the mental factors, and then also the different kind of awarenesses and how they know objects. And then the third is tarik, where you're learning the reasonings, the different kinds of reasonings that can make a correct syllogism. Okay, so that usually takes, 3-4 years. Then they start out with the perfection of wisdom, which is they're using the Abhisamaya Alankara, or Ornament of Clear Realizations, which is by Maitreya. Although, in the Tibetan tradition, it's by Maitreya. And interestingly, this text was not translated into Chinese until this century. Okay, so then they start with studying Abhisamaya Alankara. And that's usually done for 5 to 7 years. The programs at the three seats, the three large monasteries, are fairly similar, although they do have their own differences. So they study that because that text gives you a big overview of lots of topics. And even though it's called the perfection of wisdom, it's not talking, it has some passages and sections on wisdom, but it's mostly about the path. So it talks about the path of the Shravaka, the path of the solitary realizer, the path of the Bodhisattva, and then, of course, the resultant Buddhahood. Yeah. So there's lots of different topics in there, and you learn that and debate that. And then they have certain periods during that time where, I'm not sure what time of year it is, where they take a month or two off and they study Pramnavartika, so which we've been doing with Geshe Topge. And but they go much more in depth, in the reasonings, and learn the reasonings. And so they do that for a few months every year for several years to go through the text. After that ornament of clear realization, then they go on to Majjhimika, or Majjhimaka, I should say. Majjhimika is the person, Majjhimaka is the philosophy. And so there the basic text is Chandrakirti's supplement to Nagarjuna's treatise on the middle way. But they also do Tsongkhapa's Lekshe Ningpo, heart, illumination. Yeah, illumination of the essence. Yeah. So, those two texts are done in the Galu monasteries. And that's where they really get into emptiness. So, and they usually spend 2 years, sometimes 3, or sometimes more on those two texts. And then some people stop their education after that because those 3 texts are kind of the primary ones. And they feel like they have enough and they want to go meditate or practice or do something else. And then other people stay on for the last 2 topics where it doesn't involve so much debate. They do debate, but it's a different kind of study, and they've already gotten very used to debating by then, and so they like it. And so the other kind of study, is different. So the 4th text they do is Abhidharmakosha by Vasubandhu. And then the 5th is they study Vinaya, and they use the Vinaya Sutra, which isn't a sutra. It was written by Gunaprabha. And then Sakyaprabha wrote another commentary, and they used the Tibetan one by, what's his name? I just forgot it. Sonawa. Yeah, to learn that. And then those who want to go on for, then they can get their Geshe degree at that point. Some of them want to get a Larampa degree, so they do some extra years of study and review, and then they go for those exams, and they become Geshe Larampas. So that's what the program looks like in the Tibetan monasteries and nunneries. It could last like 18, 19 years, and then more if you're going for the Larampa degree. Okay, but when you start, when you're 6 or 7 years old, not when you're 25 or 35, then and you already know the language, most of them, then it's much easier to complete that. And they're also living in the. Some of them will start out at small monasteries and then go to the 3 seats when they're done with the collected topics. But even so, they're always living with relatives or friends of the family, people from their own area in Tibet. And so just by living there, they pick up a lot of how you're supposed to behave and so on as a monastic. And they already, when they enter the monastery, they're already entering with a community. Whereas Westerners, we grew up in a very individualistic society, and which adds a certain amount of stress, where you always have to prove yourself and be somebody and stick out, show, be an individual by conforming to being an individual, and so people often come to the Dharma, and because it's not a Buddhist culture here, so they're going outside their family, they're going outside the religious culture they grew up in, and they're coming in with a mind that's quite individualistic, and there aren't any communities set up. There are very few monastic communities set up for people to go into. And, you may ordain, but then go live at a Dharma center. But at a Dharma center, people are coming and going all the time. And you work, you're a staff member, basically, if you're a monastic at a Dharma center, and you help to keep it running. And then as you progress, then you can, start leading courses and teaching and so on. But, Westerners come in, and we need to learn how to do community. Yeah, the Tibetans, the culture itself is very communal oriented, And that's why in old Tibet they didn't have social services in the government, because they didn't need it, because the families took care of everybody. Now they're starting to have some social services in exile, because many of the families were fractured by going into exile. But we already come from many fractured families in this culture. So learning how to live in community is, we all want community, but we don't know how to live in community. Yeah. And we desperately want to be with other people and have companions, but we also want to get our way. Yeah. And so a different kind of learning, I think, is necessary for creating, non-Tibetan monasteries. Yeah, for a number of reasons. The culture, and then also because it isn't the religion of the country. If you ordain in Tibet or Taiwan, everybody knows what Buddhism is. Your family may not like it, but you're not doing anything that weird, okay? Whereas here, you get ordained and, people really think you've gone out on a limb, and you're, uh, maybe a little, so, but it's getting better. Oh my goodness, it's getting better than it used to be years ago, okay? But the point I'm trying to get at is that because we're coming from a different culture, a different country, our conditions, our mentality are different in that ways, that I think we need a different kind of education system, not a replica of what they're doing. But what they're doing in Tibet is wonderful for the Tibetans, and I think there's certain aspects of it we can adopt and adjust to. But right now, in terms of carrying on the full tradition and the lineage, it's going to be the Tibetans who do it, yeah, because we don't have access in our own language to all the texts. But that's okay, they've been carrying it on for years and years and centuries, and they're doing a good job. So, we want to work in a way that helps our mind.
For those who only study through the first 3 topics and leave before the Abhidharma Kosha, is there any kind of degree at that level or no?
I don't think so. Do you know? Yeah, I don't think there's a degree at that level. I should add the Nyingma tradition. For their studies, they use 13 texts that cover the same 5 topics, but rather than, the Gelus choose 1 or 2 texts and go very deeply for the 5 topics. The Nyingmas have 13 texts that they study, but it's within the same 5 topics, so it's a slightly different program. Yeah.
The thing I was thinking about last week was how everyone in this room is pretty much had to be a non-conformist in order to adopt this lifestyle, and then we all have to get together and conform.
Yeah.
It's like you're going against the stream, and then you get together and you have to all be in go the same direction.
Yeah, yeah.
It kind of doesn't always work so smoothly.
Yeah, but I think, at first it's a shock, yeah, and then you get used to it and you begin to see the value of it. And you begin to especially feel the value of having a community and how that can really help your practice. So if you have to give up a little bit of what you want to get a lot of something that's very meaningful to you and helps your practice, then that's okay. Yeah. But it takes some getting used to, and, sometimes, what do you mean? I want Fritos. Give me Fritos. It's kind of, yeah, don't you think? we come in, we're kind of like little kids. We're more polite, well, sometimes, than little kids, sometimes not. But it's like, I want free, come on, give me Fritos. Can I do this? No. Can I do this? I already answered you. Can I do this? Why not? I want to. What's wrong with it? Huh? Oh, yeah, so-and-so does. That's it, isn't it? So-and-so gets to do that. How come I can't? It's not fair. The monastics in this place are partial. Yeah, that's why you look in Vinaya, so many things about accusing the Sangha of being partial, because that's what our individualistic mind does. Yeah. It's not fair. Well, it's very fair. And then we come back to, did you come here to get your way, or did you come here to train your mind? What's your purpose? Everybody's quiet now.